Wonderful. So we have some really great talks lined up. I'll just introduce them as we start each one. But getting right to it, I want to also introduce myself because I haven't met a lot of you yet. My name's Eric Bateman. I'm the Vice President of Animal Health and Conservation here at Zoo New England. I'm a zoo veterinarian by training, but for the last 5 years, I've had the pleasure of also overseeing our field conservation department and our research programs. We'll hear, well, actually, no, we're not going to hear anything about those programs yet today, but some of our field conservation staff are here. Emily Wilder and Gabby. I don't remember how to pronounce your last name. But Emily and Gabby are field conservation staff. I encourage folks that are here to chat with them about the work that they do in the field. So with that, I think we should get started now. So I want to introduce Dr. Thalina Surasinghe, who is an associate professor of wildlife ecology with the Department of Biological Sciences at Bridgewater State University. And his talk is on trail camera surveys along an urban-rural gradient in Southeast Massachusetts. Like to use this or the lavalier? You have to pick one.
I was going to go for both, but okay. Yeah, right. Cool. All right. So thanks a lot for having me over and inviting me. And it's good to see there are some project partners, right? Jeff is right over there. And some of the other project partners whom lands have been used. Over 50% of the trail cameras are in the city of Boston. So, and I did mention several of my collaborators over here who are actually helping me with the trail camera management from Lesley University. Two of my colleagues, Amy and Chris, and then Brendan from Arnold the Arboretum of Harvard University, and Jeff right over here. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now, so the idea is here to use an automated set of trail cameras, motion activated trail cameras, to document the wildlife occupancy along an urban to rural gradient centering the greater Boston area. So what is this urban to rural gradient, right? So this is not new to most of you in this crowd. So we do know, right, when you move from the less anthropogenic rural to the urban center, you see increased human population density, more soil compaction, more impervious cover, right? And then the plant and faunal diversity, species richness, functional richness, all of those are greater towards the rural end, and it shrinks as you move towards more urban environments. Well, pollution, air pollution in particular, right, is actually more serious as you move towards the urban center. Runoff and flood regulation. There is very little need for flood regulation or runoff regulation, overland flow regulation, channelized flow regulation at the non-anthropogenic end, at the rural end, but that becomes more dominant feature in the urban landscapes, right? So, and then there are many things that we are kind of not clearly understanding, like how does the Polynesia world works, right? It's a pretty complicated world. So in urban rural gradient, there are interesting environmental phenomena that we have understood, and there are certain phenomena that we are trying to understand better, right? So in terms of wildlife, right, large mammals, carnivores, ungulates, right? If you look at the studies done all over the country, all over the continent for that matter, there's a high spatial heterogeneity in wildlife occupancy. So we are trying to understand here with respect to this project regarding Boston, how does that vary? So why is it important to tackle these kind of questions? Well, one of the most interesting theories, like to me as a wildlife ecologist, is biotic homogenization, where the spatial similarities between wildlife communities, between biological communities, increases with anthropogenic development. And these similarities could be in terms of the taxonomic identities or could be in terms of their functional uniquenesses, right? So these kind of research that actually centers around cities, urban environments, and particularly when that urban to rural gradient is replicated across multiple cities, you can actually test the theory of biotic homogenization and generalize that from one city to multiple cities. So what's happening over here, just to clarify what biotic homogenization really is. On the top, you see the regional species pool, a diverse array of species of specialists and generalists. Then what happens, urbanization is a disturbance gradient, human-induced environmental filter. Because of that filter, we actually have at higher end of disturbances, high end of urbanization, you actually end up getting lots of generalists and more specialists tend to occur away from the urban center. Now, this can further be modified if you actually look at species extinction. That's quite clear, right? What happens with the native species, how certain habitat specialists can be filtered out from the urban environment. Well, what about biological invasions, right? Or human commensal invasion, right? So that approach actually also adds to biotic homogenization. So because of these two phenomena, in species invasion and extinction of native species, you could see overall across multiple cities, biological communities becoming homogenized in urban environments. So this has been applied for many different taxa, right? In this particular top figure, you are looking at birds undergoing biotic homogenization, where the beta diversity, right? The community turnover becomes less prominent in urban environments, right? Between urban environments, although located in different ecoregions, because of biotic homogenization, you could see similarities between two different cities. And then this has also been applied largely to the insect communities, right? And the results from the insect communities are quite diverse. I'm not going to dive deep into that particular aspect. What we are trying to do with our research is apply the biotic homogenization to multiple cities, continental-wide, probably global-wide sooner, and trying to understand how can we apply that theory to mammals, right? So I'm going to speak a little bit about the entire network that I am a part of, right? And then talk about what we have been finding from our first year's results, right? That's actually currently, we are drafting a paper on that. So at North America, right now, we have over 35 partners, and we are in the process of getting 2 more international partners from Germany and from South Africa, right? So currently, our international partners are like just Canada. So there are over 35 partners in total, that each partner is studying a gradient from urban to rural, right? So a city-based gradient, and each city-based gradient is represented by a single or more transects, right? Each transect has about 25 to 30 automated trail cameras, right? And each trail camera is about 1 kilometer apart minimum from each other. So we have spatial independence, right? And then we activate these cameras at least a single month and 4 months in total in a given year. And each month represents a particular season. Yeah, of course, January is not winter for everybody, but we have to somewhat have some uniformity in terms of the temporal aspect of the data collection. But it's a good point. January is not a real winter for everybody. And then we try to, our idea is to try to uncover the ecological processes that shape wildlife community. Like what is driving the biotic homogenization? If it is it happening? If it is happening, what's driving? What kind of landscape features are driving that? So basic science, that bullet point. The second bullet point and the third bullet point are actually more educational, and the applied aspect of that. How can we manage urban green spaces better in different cities, right? Managers, land managers would love to know that, right? We haven't done we have been doing a bang up job at actually working with actual people on the ground. So we are trying to address that question, trying to help them to make decisions regarding better management of urban wildlife. And the last part, education, right? Well, in my job, 50% is teaching. So but that's not good enough, right? I have to go beyond that. And probably the people in this crowd can actually help us with, we can talk about how can we engage more people, different educational levels into a project like this. So this actually shows the entire partnership, right? All the lands that we work in and people who are partnering with this project, actually starting from City of Boston, where we have more than 50% of the cameras installed, right? And this is the transect that you can see overlaid on Google Earth, starting from sort of northern Cambridge and all the way going down to to Bridgewater. Like that's actually the transect. I had to go this far in order to get one transect, right? And it made me very envious of my colleagues in the western part, like Chicago, right? Or Madison for that matter. Jeez, yeah, they are. I could go over just out of jealousy, not they're doing any bad work, just out of jealousy. Poor New Englanders, right? So this is actually a study that one of my undergraduate honor students did for her thesis before she graduated. She graduated actually this summer. She did a terrific job with this particular project. So her interest was looking at the Boston transect, understand the occupancy pattern of these 3 species, right? And she picked these 3 species to represent the small mammals that can be detected by a trail camera: eastern gray squirrel, a carnivore, coyotes, and a large ungulate, right? White-tailed deer. So we totally so far have recorded 11 species. How am I going to, what's the timing situation, Eric? Okay, cool. So 11 mammalian species have been detected so far across all 27 sites, right? And yeah, including some of those, as you can see, especially in the urban area, we have lots of domesticated animals being recorded. What is a surprise that you would assume to see, but not in this list? Yeah, good pick. Yeah, it's a huge surprise. And one of our collaborators from Cambridge said, "Delina, you're not going to see skunks." I was like, ha 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 ha. You're joking, right? No, he wasn't. Yeah, no skunks. So I don't know why. It's not like, how many have you seen skunks like in your parking lot? Like I don't know. Are camera shy? I don't know why we don't see them. And then lots of other like large birds, especially in city properties where we have cameras right next to wetland, we see actually lots of wetland bird activity. Will a small bird act? I'm going to say yes, without reasonably yes, because that has been happening to us, but we cannot identify what the bird clearly really is. And in Arboretum, I have my trail cameras being activated by moths. Yeah, first you see a ghost, like in image. Oh yeah, there is a ghost. I was like, oh, nah, it's a moth. It's really cool to see that happening. The woodland moths in the Arboretum, really cool to see that. So we have total of that many detections, right? Can't remember how many false detections we have had, quite a lot in the winter. So eastern gray squirrels, over 1,600, no surprise. And then coyotes, that's a pretty good number, right? Nearly 300 coyote detections, and white-tailed deer, as many, like slightly above the level of coyotes. So that is just detections, right? Before doing occupancy modeling. Oh, we have not gone into abundance level occupancy modeling yet. It requires so much data, but that's not something I'm against doing. I'm looking forward to go towards that end. So, so only species out of these 3 that we detected in all 27 sites is the eastern gray squirrel. Again, not a huge surprise. Coyotes and white-tailed deer roughly in the same number of sites, but not exactly in the same sites, right? We have deer exclusion, probably by fencing in several properties, probably including the zoo, I think, Jeff, right? So, but I also wonder whether some of the sites are too urban for deer and coyotes to occur. So we are currently doing more of a higher scale project, trying to understand the fragmentation and try to quantify the urban space to understand the species absence as a species absence, whether can we attribute that to these landscape features only and exclude fencing. So coyote detection is actually quite high in urban environments, right? Quite high in urban environments. Detection, again, detection, not occupancy, right? And white-tailed deer is quite high in detection in suburban sites, right? Particularly in terms of towns. If you leave, like, go past Milton, Staunton, that area, you actually have a quite high levels of deer detection. Okay, that is actually the worst slide to add to a PowerPoint. I mean, the occupancy modeling output, how it looks like. Let's take a look at some of the graphs. That's much easy to read, right? Those who really want numbers, wait until I publish. So gray squirrel, my right graph, you are looking at the season versus the occupancy, right? And then what we see over here is the occupancy modeling I ran is unmarked, right? Which, by the way, is a very data hungry function in R, right? But I was able to run it with and satisfy all the assumption tests. So what we see over here is actually as the season progresses from one winter to the next winter, number 1 is the first winter, number 5 is the last winter that I sampled, right? You actually see slight increase, like overall trend, the increasing in occupancy as the season progresses for eastern gray squirrel, right? Oh, sorry, great question. 1, winter. 2, winter is January. 2, spring, April. 3, July, summer. 4, October, fall. 5, the next winter. That's an excellent question. We did not classify based on the age class here. We did not, it's just what species is there and whether it's presence or absence. I didn't even look into the abundance. So, but based on what my students been telling me, they haven't seen that kind of a recruitment. So the chances are it's actually movements, right? Yeah, it could be, but we don't, it's hard to tell that age class for the eastern gray squirrel with a trail camera. Yeah. So, but that's a great question though. No, the question was whether the eastern gray squirrel occupancy being increased across the season is a result of reproduction. It's a great question with a bad answer. The answer is actually we don't know. But we know for sure, like, this pattern is quite clear. The increase in occupancy as the season progresses. Or whether it's actually movement, like colonization, because if you look at the colonization data, again, look at those two significant figures in terms of, sorry, extinction, there is some significance, but colonization, look at that. None of, those the between station movement is not significantly different between any of the season in terms of colonization. With extinction, there are differences. So it's kind of a big mystery for me, what's actually driving that pattern. Explaining colonization and extinction, it's extremely hard. If you look at the occupancy versus the impervious cover, right, meaning developed cover, we can see, right, actually it's increasing. The occupancy is increasing with increased urbanization, right? And it stabilizes, it reaches a maximum around 25% urban cover and stays extremely high, right? For very high urban levels. Where the city is that I'm sorry, I didn't understand the point. Sure.
I'm trying to understand the percent impervious land cover within 1 kilometer of the camera station axis, what that means in terms of what it would look like or how you calculate that. That's all.
Oh, that's a good question. So how I calculated that was I used the USGS impervious land cover dataset that they have already developed based on Landsat, which is 30 meter in resolution, right? And then, so that is actually per pixel, a 30 by 30 meter pixel. It tells you what is the percentage of developed surfaces versus not, right? That's actually, that's what it is. So I used the existing data set for that. It was not my own characterization. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question about the chipmunks because they would be one of the competitors with squirrels for acorns. And I would assume that their populations would go down in an urban gradient because they need to be nesting underground. So the more sealed that soil is, the less chipmunks you'll find in the urban core. So is it possibly a function of competition or release of competition? Or what did you also find with chipmunks in general?
So we did find quite a few chipmunks, but we did not quantify their occupancy to properly answer your question. I have to, right? I have the detection data, which I don't remember, but my only biggest concern is I didn't find any good evidence where trail cameras being used to quantify chipmunks, probably because of their small size. But I do see both of them quite, frequently to co-occur, right, in these habitats, but do not know, do they compete? Obviously, right? Obviously, and then actually one is more aggressive than the other, right? So there is likely competition going on, but whether I have evidence to suggest the occupancy being declined, one being lower than the other, I don't, and I'm not sure whether I should use trail camera to quantify chipmunk.
Mm-hmm.
That's my biggest question, concern to address that great question.
Okay, thanks.
Right, cool. All right. So now, anyone who's wondering why there's a little hump going over 1%, 100% occupancy, that's bad smoothing, right? I have to rewrite the code not to exceed. Can you see little hump? Yeah, that's bad coding. I have to recode and make sure like it doesn't do that. Actually, I could blame my student who actually ran the codes. So, and then if you look at the coyote, well, again, it's interesting. You can see a massive drop.
Yeah, Liz Truss resigned
across the season, right? And then it stabilizes. Right? So from winter, was that a question coming from Zoom or am I hearing things? Oh, yeah. So from first winter to the spring, we actually see a drop in occupancy for the coyotes, right? And then of course it becomes relatively stable, right? And it increases and becomes stable, right? And also with the imperviousness, again, we see a major drop as the urbanization increases, major drop, but still with increasing imperviousness, with increasing urbanization, you do not see the probability of occupancy of coyotes going way down, right? Now, is that some sort of a concentration effect happening in the urban environment where they are not able to disperse outside, right? Or is it actually there being, a typical human commensal? Well, we have to figure it out. Okay, I have skipped that one. And then white-tailed deer, again, in terms of seasonality, very low occupancy in the early, like colder seasons, and then of course it increases. Doesn't surprise because you have the more vegetation, like supply emerging after summer and onwards. So that is completely unsurprising to see very low occupancy earlier on. And one more point I would bring up is actually in some of the suburban sites, I actually do see deer occupancy or detection dropping to 0 in winter and then getting like hundreds in summer, right? So they're actually seasonally moving between patches. Really cool, right? And in terms of occupancy with impervious cover, right, slight drop initially and then increasing, right, with urbanization. This is actually a really interesting situation because deer is a zoonotic vector, right? So we have evidence from not only from Boston but from New York. Not us, one of our collaborators in the network, they actually have evidence to suggest that deer occupancy is still high, right? It almost never dropped to 0 detection, even in the most developed areas in Staten Island, sorry, in Long Island. I mean, we're talking about freaking Long Island, right? So we even believe that there is a higher concentration of deer trap without connectivity, right? So that's another project that we are trying to get some money to work on. So that's basically what we actually have done so far. And this paper is in writing, and I needed to try a couple of other occupancy models using Bayesian statistics, simply because Unmark is extremely data hungry, right? So I wanted to rerun with those and a couple of other experimental occupancy modeling that our network has developed. So there are lots of really interesting questions that we can answer, and we are trying to answer this with my research lab within Boston, as well as with collaboration with the multiple cities as well, right? And we, as we try to expand on this urban ecology research, we are looking for partners, right? So if there are interests in adapting a camera, working with us, joining the network, right? I would love to talk to you during our chat. And then anyone who's doing citizen science, we have tons of photos to tag, right? So if you have volunteers, kids, high school kids to college kids looking for cool work, all you need is a computer and an internet connection, right? And able to identify the few species of wildlife we are left here in New England, right? So there are plenty of educational opportunities, research opportunities. So I would love to talk to you more about that during the mingling time. So with that, I will actually finish my presentation.
Great, thank you very much. So we can still take a few minutes for questions, and we'll see how this works on Zoom too. I think if you have a question on Zoom, if you could please raise your hand or otherwise get our attention. But if you know how to use the raise hand function in Zoom, we'll take your questions in order. And yeah. And then if anybody here has a question, wait for me to come with the mic. Was that a hand back there? Yeah.
It may be that I put every boomer into sleep.
Sure. Great, thanks a lot. Hello, my name is Ryan Lippman-Quinn. I've worked a bit in One Health and biodiversity informatics internationally. But in Massachusetts, I worked on some ecosystem restoration projects on Cape Cod. And we're looking at the health of soils under power lines. And because there's a lot of herbicide applications and looking at different kinds of managing the ecosystems. And we stumbled on a bunch of remote sensing cameras there, but it was like a business case for them. It was for lost dogs. And I thought that was really interesting that there's like it's a profitable business model to have these cameras along power lines. So I'd be curious if you're aware of these kinds of for-profit businesses and exploring partnerships with them, because I'm sure they're picking up more coyotes than lost dogs. But it was just a really interesting thing to stumble.
No, this is the first time, honestly.
Okay. Yeah.
No, this is the first time.
I took pictures of it, but they had a little card and stuff. I'll send it to you. I'm happy to
Please
share
do.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Free data, right?
Yeah, well, hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Great, thanks. And I see Jean Devine has a question. Jean, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we do, I think.
Okay. Did your cameras pick up images of rats? I don't think you mentioned that, particularly close to, Cambridge and Boston, where over COVID, I think the population seemed to have increased.
So in certain extremely urban areas with like a very high impervious cover, when I was particularly experimenting different sites, I did have an experimental trail camera in Somerville in a urban garden, like a, what do you call it, community garden, right? Yeah, there were tons of rats, like huge ones. In couple of Boston city properties there were, but it was not that prominent. The one that the Somerville sites came up because that's what I always see: daytime squirrels, nighttime rats. So, but That was during the COVID period too, but do we see any of that in the other sites conspicuously? During night, what you see first is the glare, the eye glare. Even in the small mammals, we do see that, but not that prominently, not that much. And IDing them with trail camera data is extremely difficult. So for a project that we are trying to get funding for, we are proposing Sherman traps to quantify it. It's a really important parameter in urban wildlife to study the small mammal population. But yeah, that's the answer I have for Jean's question.
Oh, thank you.
That's another one. I
Okay,
think.
and looks like Jeff is next.
Yeah, I need to take a look at the map of where the cameras were again, but did you by any chance examine if anywhere your camera was located allowed hunting? And whether or not that influenced the number of deer you were picking up?
Yeah. That is actually another point thing we are studying right now. So here's the problem. There are sites that I know the hunting is permitted. That's something we actually categorize. Every site, one of the site properties, whether hunting is permitted or not. If it is, what kind they hunt with what. Right. There are some bow hunting sites down, like, south of Boston, the post-suburban environments. There are several properties where hunting is permitted. But the problem, there's a huge difference between hunting being permitted and people actually hunting. Right. So I talked to the land managers, land stewards of those areas. They said we permit hunting, but sometimes you get like 2 archers in a season. So it's very low hunting intensity, but that's a really important point to consider. I completely agree. Our ongoing project, the grant we are working on, that actually includes quantifying the actual land stewardship and extent of hunting, intensity of hunting, based on the hunting data that you can get from the state.
Thanks.
Thanks. Dave had a comment in the chat. Dave, you want to unmute and tell us, or do you want me to read it?
Citizen science using ring doorbells and both resident and commercial cameras. I'm not sure I understand the question.
He's suggesting, I believe, that using the Ring doorbell systems, that you could capture images of wildlife just at people's front yards.
Yeah, like I am not sure. That's a great way to get more data, but people will not share that data. Right? It's a personal property data. So that would be a really cool data source, though, if you can make it happen. Do we have any partnership with the police that can make it a rule? But yeah, like commercial data, like there are like other commercial proper camera, like, like surveillance camera, like those are not going to be, I actually tried that with some cities. No, like we could go into trouble, like even if by asking. Like I started with Cambridge. They were like, oh, dude. And I didn't even ask Paul because of that. So yeah, there are really great other data sources that we are losing. Right, like the surveillance based data, like we don't have access to that. So very unfortunate.
All right, we'll take just one more question and then we need to move on to next doc. Introduce yourself, Rachel.
My name is Rachel. I'm with the National Park Service at the Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park. I'm very happy to be back in person for this. But in terms of what you were saying about some places have hunting, some don't. I don't know if I missed it, but where are the cameras in terms of like public land, private land? Like, how did you decide and how did you quantify that?
Yeah, so those lands are largely, well, public access. All the lands over here have public access, right? But some of them are public lands, like the Boston city properties. They are all publicly owned, and some of the land trust properties like Mount Auburn, those are publicly accessible but privately owned, right? So there is a very, like I mentioned in the previous question, the actual land stewardship is also really interesting because that stewardship goes into how you manage it, right? For example, in Boston, there's invasive species removal, trail management, but in some of the other towns in the Boston periphery, like Staunton, they don't do anything, right? So, so that actual land management intervention is quite complicated. It's very heterogeneous across the entire transect. So we have urban wild. That's the name, right, Nick? urban wildlands from the city of Boston. We have the Fresh Pond from city of Cambridge. We have Stoughton properties. We have lots of town conservation commissions in this entire transect that are mostly dedicated for recreational activities, hiking, and also a few other conservation easements that are open to public for recreational activities. So yeah, so that's actually the stewardship and where the lands are located. Yeah.
Thanks very much.